We're just going to dive right in. So basically we want to talk about medications, how they affect your bowel. You know how important your bowel is. It's basically your second brain. It's the whole operational system to your functioning as a human. It's like if your car doesn't have gas or oil, it's not going to run really well. So we really need to hone in on how to keep you guys running strong and running smoothly. So diving right in, I want Adam to talk about pain meds and how those affect your system.
Hey guys, yeah, I'm sure you guys, if you're tuning in and you're in your earlier days of your injury, you probably, or you may well have quite a few pharmaceuticals that you've been sent home with. And for myself, I've tried to kind of wean myself off of them as much as possible so that if I need them later, then I'm not, escalating things further. As a lot of you know, pain meds and some other medications kind of dehydrate the tissues in your body and subsequently dehydrate your colon, which makes it a lot harder for your bowels to pass regularly and smoothly and on time, hopefully, in general.
Yes. So we were talking about some experiences that he had, like even in the hospital, the expectation of having a caregiver do your bowel program. Like, it's very important that it's understood by whoever you're involved with your scenario or your environment, who's doing your bowel program. Because when somebody's not going to pay attention to that, and you don't know that you're going to be able to go, you may or may not have accidents, you may get more compacted, and you may subsequently have a wound or something and not know that you might be sitting in some pretty dangerous bacteria. So these are all things that Adam has had experiences with, and can really even be life-threatening. So do you want to add any notes to that?
Yeah, well, one fundamental thing that we didn't quite mention, but most of you guys realize, is that constipation and obviously diarrhea, obviously involuntary bowel movements, can make life really hard, especially when we're trying to get out and do stuff and try to have some semblance of a normal life. And the better we can control that cycle and that regularity, the less it impacts our lives negatively, and the more we can do the things that we aspire to do and work on our goal setting and achieving our goals.
So previously we'd done a video about Adam's routine, and I said, well, we need to talk about all the times that your routine isn't going efficiently. So, like if, for example, you've eaten something or you're ill with a virus and all of a sudden you have extremely loose bowels, you're dealing with increased dehydration, but then also maybe needing to get in control of that to actually make yourself a little more constipated so that you can form a normal stool. So Adam was saying how he actually uses sometimes prescription medications to reverse the loose stool to be like getting it back to normal.
Right. I've tried pretty hard to completely wean myself off pain meds, 100%. And these days, I actually take pain meds, usually half of one. I usually take them more often to intentionally slow down my elimination cycle than I actually use them for pain, just because, with an opiate pain med, it's kind of guaranteed to slow everything down and firm things up, as it were, and dehydrate that area, because obviously if you have diarrhea, then your colon is taking on water, so there's a lot of extra hydration there, and it can be kind of a quick method when you don't have other methods available to you. You may well have pain meds with you, so that might help in a pinch.
So we're going to go into another video about biorhythms and frequency and all of that, but I actually studied Ayurveda for a long time, and what I love about the Indian medicine is how it talks about all properties and the elements of the earth. So you have water, air, fire, wind, all of these different things that actually are all parts of our body. So what would be great is for y'all to kind of start taking a mental note about what's going on in your body, whether you have too much heat and that's what's causing your diarrhea and that you need to cool your system down, or whether your body's taking on too much water like he was saying and maybe you need to dry it out a little. Because as you're taking all these different medications, you're gonna start learning how your body's reacting to them, but really take note and really pay attention so that you'll know how to counterbalance that. Because we were also talking about how mostly Adam's been able to get off bladder spasm medication, but that's another medication that he sometimes has to start taking again. And you were talking about the different types and what they started doing to dry out your mouth. So I want you to tell them about that.
Right, like those of you on bladder spasm meds might be familiar with this, but you know, when you're on insurance, there's certain bladder spasm meds that are covered and certain ones that are not. And it seems that, in my case, it seemed like they tried out the harshest ones first, because the 2 bladder spasm meds that I started out with, I had really severe symptoms. Like one of them made my they both made my gums bleed, and one of them actually made my overnight, and one of them actually made my tongue like crack open and my tongue was bleeding just overnight.
And that was which one? You had talked about it. It was the
Ditropan was the worst one.
Yeah.
And the other one, the name is escaping me at the moment.
You had Tovias.
Tovias. Okay, so I had those 2 bladder spasm meds, and they obviously didn't work very well. And you know, for medical necessity, for an appeal for insurance to pay for a bladder spasm med that didn't make my mouth bleed, I had to go through 2 medications and establish that they wouldn't work. So obviously I did that, and then I was able to get on a bladder spasm med called Tovias, which I was on for 5 years or so, and then my insurance decided they didn't want to pay for that one. So now I'm back on oxybutin, which is probably what a lot of you are taking now. And oxybutin, the symptoms, or the side effects, are much more mild than, say, Ditropan, in my case, at least. And but they still dry out my mouth, and I feel a little more dehydrated throughout my body when I'm taking it. I kind of notice the difference when I stop taking it. And actually, I do take pumpkin seed oil instead of my bladder spasm med when I'm not having any acute symptoms. I've had bladder stones and some complications over time where the pumpkin seed oil didn't quite do it, and I had to take the oxybutin. But actually, while I'm taking the pumpkin seed oil, I honestly don't notice the oxybutin working all that much more. So I like to stay off of it as much as possible, and I'm constantly pulling myself back off of it and sticking with the pumpkin seed oil, and it's actually very surprising how well that works, especially if you stay hydrated and stay away from things that you know give you more sediment in your catheter.
So how do you know when you can teeter between pumpkin seed oil and then when you need to go back to your medication?
So for me, I've kind of learned what my symptoms are for a UTI, and I have, these certain precursors and like certain subtle things that I start to pick up on, and as those symptoms progress, I get pretty concentrated bladder spasms, and there's a point at which they persist. And I don't want to get too far into bladder spasms since we're talking about bowels, because there's some other things that I do supplement-wise to stop UTIs and to prevent UTIs. But when I have the symptoms of a UTI, aside from changing some things in my diet, and taking in more water. Once those spasms reach a certain intensity, I basically have to add the oxybutynin to the mix until that kind of dies down.
Do you have certain things that you do to hydrate more intensely than just water? Just out of curiosity.
Colon-wise, I do. Typically, I just hydrate with water, and taking in electrolytes. But for my colon in particular, I take a Chinese herb called Fo Tea or Heishu Wu, which has several different uses in Chinese medicine, one of which specifically is hydration of the colon. So that one helps me every day. A lot of you probably already heard about magnesium. Magnesium definitely helps you hydrate your bowels and keeps them supple, actually, so that if you have compacted stools, not only is it more hydrated, but it's more supple. So if you're passing pebbles or rocks, then they're going to move through your system a lot better if those tissues are really dried out and there's a lot of friction. And then your body's going to keep producing more and more mucus to make that stuff come out. And the more compacted you get, the more mucus you get, the more your body tries to take on water, if your medication allows it. And then oftentimes the end byproduct of that is a big surprise involuntary bowel movement, with a whole lot behind it a lot of times, because it takes a little while to get to that point.
Well, we were saying how a lot of people that end up with paralysis and tears have a really hard time with their belly getting distended and getting big, and that you really try to work on that. So how do you do that? And what is the benefit of it staying not as big?
Right. So the biggest benefit to not having a very distended gut is probably just the time bomb effect, where I'm at the point now where I can tell if I'm 1 day behind in my elimination or if I'm 2 days behind. I don't really get 3 days behind, and I haven't been 2 days behind in a very long time, but I've tried to clean my system out, and my diet's changed a lot. I could talk about that later. If anyone wants to know, please ask some questions. I'd love to answer them. But I've done a lot of things with my diet to help streamline my elimination. For the most part, I try to eat protein and vegetables only. But I'll get into that later perhaps. But that kind of allows things to move through a little more quickly. And I have to be kind of careful with that, because once you clean yourself all the way out, it's harder to regulate yourself to only go once a day. So there's a little bit of a balance between cleaning yourself out, cleansing yourself as much as possible, and possibly slowing things down a little bit here and there to make sure you don't have loose stools. And if I eat very, very light for 4 or 5 days in a row, where I'm eating a lot of vegetables, very lean meat, no starch, no sugar, it kind of starts to get a little bit sketchy. So
Sketchy in that you'll have looser stools?
In terms of having looser stools and having perhaps more erratic timing. For the most part, I've done a good job keeping up with it, and it's not something I have issues with more than maybe once a year typically. So it's been nice to get to that point. When I was early on in my injury, I tried to be vegan to keep my system really clean, because I knew I'd be sitting around a lot and not doing much. I basically did absolutely nothing the first 2 years because I couldn't move anything. So there was really not anything I could do physically. And
so even the slightest movement has been helping.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we talked about with exercise and stretching, abdominal activation, twisting, ranging the lower body,
And just so you guys know, Adam hasn't slept for like 5 nights because he's had dorsiflexion, like spasticity. So, you know, it's similar to being drunk. But what I thought might be helpful is maybe we make like just a punch list really quick, like 1, 2, 3. What are the most intense pharmaceuticals that affect your bowels either way? Can you just say, would it be number 1 is like any kind of...
I would say opioid painkillers for sure.
Opioids is number 1. So this is for constipation. And then number 2 is the nerve and bladder spasm medication, pretty
specifically the bladder spasm.
So bladder spasm medicine is different than you said other spasm meds because it specifically targets the bladder. So then what's number 3? That constipation.
There are some other pain meds.
What about just like Tylenol, Advil?
I was just gonna say, if I take like a prescription grade dose, let's see, what is the dosage there of naproxen sodium? That definitely slows me down, and that's probably the one I have the most experience with. That's
okay. So
not a narcotic.
Oh, really? Okay. So then let's talk about how you solve that. Is number 1, are you talking like you drink that calcium magnesium drink that you get at the store? Or
there's something called calcium citrate. I think, yeah, calcium citrate. And
is that like taking that calm stuff, like the powder?
no, it's
You know what I'm talking about?
it's magnesium citrate.
Oh,
That's what I was trying to remember, sorry. Magnesium citrate is like swallowing the countdown clock for a bomb. Because
that's what you take when you get a colonoscopy too. They make you drink that stuff.
okay, that makes a lot of sense
But it
because
basically turns it to liquid, right?
it sure does. When I was in the hospital early on, 8 or 9 pharmaceuticals, maybe more. I haven't gone back to look, but a very large handful of meds every morning. And let's see, I went 5 days basically, maybe 6, with no bowel movement whatsoever, and there's a point where it gets pretty dangerous for you. And it can definitely cause autonomic dysreflexia, which is a whole nother topic of discussion, but
just when your blood pressure drops significantly,
or,
which probably all of you know.
Or goes up. Or
goes up significantly.
Yeah. So typically you'll take magnesium citrate at that point whenever you feel you need that type of intervention, and you want to be pretty close to the toilet if you take that stuff. It seems to take its own time and show up whenever it decides to, and work very, very thoroughly when it does. So magnesium citrate is great to get if you're really worried about your stools and they're really far behind.
And it's just at the store, right? It's usually like on the bottom shelf.
Over the counter, yeah.
In like where the shampoo and Alka-Seltzer is. So what would be maybe a less...
Well, I think we have to just put hydration up there just because drinking water is just so important, especially if you're constipated.
And you know what else is really good for this is coconut water. Coconut water has a lot of natural laxatives in it and electrolytes, and it's got oily kind of water too, so that really helps as well.
And there's some other dietary things we can talk about that play into this too.
Yeah, Adam's got like a special sauerkraut recipe. But anything else that solves constipation quickly that you're wanting to share?
Some of the most basic stuff that a lot of people are already familiar with is like coffee.
Which is actually diuretic.
It is a diuretic, and the caffeine stimulates the
peristalsis.
peristalsis.
Okay. trying to think if there's anything else. Well, you know.
I think we're starting getting
Sometimes-
around with dietary stuff.
Yeah, we are, because I was going to say flaxseed oil or oils in general. But okay, so there we go. So that's for constipation. So for diarrhea, do you have recommendations too?
Most of how I handle loose bowels is dietary.
Okay. Well, maybe we just go into it really quick. And
Yeah.
we can always expand later, but since we're on the topic. So, what did I have over here? We're both on a walk of sleep here. Okay, how do you solve a loose stool then?
Solving loose stool.
You said sometimes you'll take a pain pill.
That's kind of my, go-to in a pinch when there's really
Half.
not many other, and I take a half a pain med, which I take also when I have pain. When I do need a pain med for pain, I only take half of one. That kind of works right away. And for me, I don't keep any other medications around that I really take normally that would have any influence on this. So, and I definitely wouldn't take like an extra bladder spasm med if I was already taking that. Although that is something that it is something you can consider. Like if you are having really strong bladder spasms, there's a certain amount you can take per day that's probably less than you're normally taking from your doctor.
Well, I know that you would never eat bread though, so I'm not even gonna say that. What about like oatmeal or anything like that?
When it comes to food,
Or rice?
potatoes.
Potatoes.
I did a lot of colon cleansing and fasting when I was younger,
Uh-huh.
and everything I read about really aggressive colon cleansing addressed people that detox too fast, too quickly. If you do too much of a fast, too much of a cleanse at once, you're purging toxins from your tissues, from your gut, from your all over your body that are flowing through your bloodstream, and you can go into toxic shock and it can kill you if you're not prepared for it. And a lot of you probably aren't doing really extreme colon cleansing, but one thing I learned from that is that the best way to stop a cleanse immediately if you're over detoxing is to eat a baked potato. And any kind of potato, I mean, you could eat it raw, but cooked potato, the starch in potato, it's a binding agent, right? So just like rice is also not a bad thing if you're trying to slow everything down. If you're taking on too much water, your stools are too loose, and especially if you're not able to get yourself on the toilet, or decide on your own timing for your bowel movements, stuff like this can come in really handy.
And I don't know, we're talking a little bit about diet, but there's also, for those of you who haven't heard about the corn test, if you're trying to figure out and get to know your system and your body, if you eat a little bit of corn and then pay attention to when it actually comes out, because it doesn't usually digest all the way, that'll give you a really good indication of how long it's taking you to pass things. And you'll know if you're passing things within 6 hours of eating them or 12, whether you're getting enough nutrition versus it's showing up a couple days later. So that's something you can easily look for is corn.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever done that, but
And
is there anything?
there's pH in food. If we have a really acidic diet, we secrete a lot more mucus in our colon to protect ourselves from absorbing those toxins. And if we always eat acidic food, then we're constantly producing mucus, and that forms into a hard mucoid fecal layer that is hard to cut with a knife. And obviously your nutrient uptake isn't going to be very good if you're lined with stuff that's hard to cut with a knife. So then you have to eat more, you have to uptake more just to get the nutrition that you need, and that easily lends itself to constipation, more mucus because of the constipation, and then taking on water to try to get rid of the constipation naturally in the form of diarrhea.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you're having struggles with just your bowel program in general, is to look online and look at foods that are acidic versus foods that are alkaline. It's interesting because usually the ones that you would think are acidic are the alkaline ones, and usually the ones that you would think to your palate are alkaline are actually more acidic. Like sugar is super acidic and lemons are super alkaline. So when in doubt, lemon water every morning is a really good way to alkalize your body too. Something we should all do. Let's see, is there anything else you think we should mention about pain meds and supplements as they're related to diarrhea and constipation?
I think we've done most of it. It did occur to me that if you take an iron supplement, if you're dealing with low blood pressure and decide to take iron also helps with loose bowels a little bit.
There's a over-the-counter, you can get it at Vitamin Cottage. It's a powder that's called the brand name Calm, and it's magnesium and calcium in a little powder that you could put a tablespoon in a cup of water at night, and that would be a little less intense comparative to the citrate, magnesium citrate, calcium
Citrate, magnesium citrate.
Magnesium citrate. So those are kind of on the scale of, slightly helping you do that versus like the big bomb. Okay, well, thank you. Hopefully this was helpful information, and we'll be talking more in Module 4 about how to stay healthy with your bowels.
And feel free to leave any comments, especially questions, underneath the video if you'd like for us to go into any more detail.
Yes, or experiences if you just want to share.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.